The scandal began with a thud, not of thunder or gunfire, but of a ballroom door striking against a marble pillar as Lady Eleanor Ashcombe stumbled into the hall, her name sharp on the tongues of those who had spent the season predicting her downfall. The musicians faltered. Conversations dipped. And though no blood had been spilled, something inside her felt as though it had been struck clean through. She had come to the midwinter assembly with trembling hope that society might grant her a moment's grace. Instead, it felt as though the very walls exhaled in anticipation of witnessing her disgrace once more. She heard her name whispered again, Eleanor, pitiable Eleanor, as if she were already a ghost haunting the edge of her own prospects. The young ladies beside the refreshment table tittered behind their fans. One remarked that her gown looked a season behind, another that her family's debts were visible in every thread. Eleanor pretended not to hear, but each insult burrowed into her ribs like cold iron. She forced her spine straight, as her governess had taught her, yet dignity felt like a fragile cost she was paying in public. Then came the remark that cracked her composure. She will accept any man, a young aristocrat said lightly, even one old enough to be her father. Mark my words, she will be bartered off before spring. The words landed like a lash. Eleanor's breath caught. She turned away, unable to keep her expression neutral. The shame of being discussed so openly, so mercilessly, pressed against her throat. Her father had once told her that reputation was the currency of their world. Tonight she felt bankrupt. She slipped to the far end of the hall, where a balcony door stood ajar, offering the solace of cooler air. She stepped outside, gripping the stone railing as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. The night was quiet, not with peace but with the heavy silence that follows humiliation. She closed her eyes and forced slow breaths, trying to swallow her trembling. Tears, she had learned, were a luxury she could not afford in public. Behind her, the ball resumed its glittering rhythm, but Eleanor felt no part of it. She had arrived hoping merely to be tolerated. That had been foolish. Society required weakness to dine upon, and tonight she had been served on a platter. She was still steadying herself when a shift in the air signaled someone approaching. A hush rippled through the ballroom, curious, reverent. Eleanor did not turn, but she sensed the change, the way attention bent toward a single point. The Duke of Ravensshire had arrived. Even Eleanor, who rarely followed gossip, knew his legend, a widower of unwavering discipline, 40 years old, more feared than admired, yet held by Parliament as a man whose word carried weight. He seldom attended gatherings. When he did, whispers trailed him like a cloak. They said he had loved his late wife with a devotion that bordered on ruin. They said he lived behind walls no one could breach. They said he would never marry again. Eleanor did not intend to look at him. She wished only to disappear into the night. But the door behind her creaked softly, followed by footsteps, measured, deliberate. She straightened instinctively. "Forgive the intrusion," a deep voice said, calm and courteous. She turned. The Duke stood in the doorway, his expression inscrutable beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers. His presence was not loud, yet it filled the balcony, commanding without force. His eyes, dark and steady, observed her with a restraint she had never seen. "I did not mean to disturb your solitude," he added. Eleanor dipped into a quick curtsy, praying her voice would not betray her bruised pride. "Your Grace, you disturb nothing. I sought a moment of air." His gaze flickered, noting the tension in her shoulders. "A difficult evening, Lady Eleanor?" She wished she could lie, but the truth clung too tightly. "It seems I have become the subject of unwelcome speculation." The Duke stepped closer, though not enough to impose. Society is fond of crafting stories where none exist. Its appetite is never satisfied. She managed a hollow smile. "I fear they find me an easy meal." He studied her, as if weighing something deeper than her words. Ease of target reflects not on its victim, but on the cruelty of those who aim. Eleanor blinked. No one had ever spoken in her defense with such calm certainty. Before she could reply, the ballroom door swung wider, and her father's urgent voice cut through the evening. "Eleanor. There you are, Your Grace." Her father's face flushed with relief and something more fragile. Eleanor sensed the gravity. "We must speak at once." She stiffened. "Papa, It cannot wait," he whispered sharply, glancing toward the Duke. Eleanor followed him into a quiet antechamber. The candlelight trembled as though aware of the storm about to break. Her father clasped his hands, breathing unevenly. "Eleanor," he began, "our situation is untenable. Debts have mounted beyond what I can hide. We are on the verge of ruin." Her stomach dropped. She had suspected as much, but hearing it made her knees weaken. "I have been offered a solution," he continued, shame heavy in his voice. "A marriage. A secure one." Eleanor felt the air thin. "To whom?" Her father looked toward the doorway. "To the Duke of Ravensshire." Her pulse thundered. "Papa, he is twice my age. And he hardly knows me." He knows enough, her father said. His offer will save us. Eleanor closed her eyes. The ballroom gossip had become prophecy. Before she could gather her breath, a soft knock sounded. The Duke's silhouette appeared, still and composed. "Lady Eleanor," he said, voice low but firm, "may I speak with you, alone?" His tone held neither command nor presumption, only a sincerity that suggested he understood far more of the moment than either she or her father wished to confess aloud, and that he intended no unkindness. The wedding began with a silence so sharp it felt like a reprimand from fate itself. No cheers, no murmurs of delight, only the brittle quiet of a ceremony no one wished to witness. Eleanor stood beside the Duke with her hands clasped tightly before her, her pulse scattering as she repeated the vows that tied her life to a man she scarcely knew. The clergyman's voice trembled once, as if even he sensed the tension woven into every promise being spoken. Eleanor did not lift her gaze. She feared the sight of pity in the few attendees who had come, drawn more by curiosity than affection. When the final blessing was pronounced, she felt no triumph, only the weight of a choice that had never been hers. Her father's relieved exhale behind her cut deeper than any insult. He squeezed her shoulder with gratitude that carried its own cruelty. She had saved him by sacrificing herself. The Duke offered his arm with measured courtesy, and she placed her hand upon it because to refuse would invite scandal. Together, they left the chapel with the dignity expected of their titles, though Eleanor felt as if she were walking through the remnants of her former life, each step stripping away another layer of innocence.
The carriage ride to Ravensshire Manor was quiet, too quiet. Eleanor kept her eyes on the window, though she did not care what passed outside. Her thoughts were louder than any landscape. She wondered what kind of husband the Duke intended to be, stern, aloof, indifferent, or perhaps simply dutiful. She wondered whether he regretted this union as she did, or if he viewed her merely as a responsibility he had agreed to shoulder. "You are not to fear me, Lady Eleanor," the Duke said at last, his voice even, not unkind. "This arrangement serves us both. I do not expect more from you than you are willing to give." She swallowed, the words both comforting and devastating. "I appreciate your consideration, Your Grace." He observed her quietly. "You may call me Alistair in private, if you wish." Eleanor nodded because refusal felt too bold. Yet she could not imagine uttering his Christian name. It belonged to a world of intimacy she did not know how to navigate. When they arrived at the manor, she felt an unexpected quiver of apprehension. The structure held an atmosphere thickened by years of quiet grief. Even without stepping inside, she sensed the echo of solitude that lived within its walls. Servants greeted them with practiced composure, but Eleanor saw the flicker of surprise in their eyes. Their master had brought home a wife, the household would need time to adjust. She was shown to her chambers, separate from the Duke's, though adjoining. The arrangement startled her with its gentleness. She had braced herself for demands, for expectations her mother had warned her were inevitable. Instead, she found space, privacy, and an untouched writing desk arranged near the hearth. A small leather-bound journal lay upon it, the kind used for personal reflections. A note rested atop the cover. "For your thoughts, which deserve a home of their own. A.R." Eleanor lifted the journal with trembling hands. She had never received a gift of such quiet significance. Not jewelry, not trivial ornamentation, this was something meant for her mind, not her appearance. Something that suggested he wished her voice to exist, even if softly. That night, she attempted to write her thoughts, but found her emotions too tangled for ink. She placed the journal back on the desk, deciding she would fill it only when she understood herself better. The next morning, she joined the Duke for breakfast in a modest dining room chosen, he explained, to avoid overwhelming her. He conversed with calm restraint, asking about her interests without pressing her for answers she wasn't ready to offer. His politeness unsettled her. She had expected distance, perhaps coldness, but not this sincere, measured effort. Her growing unease came not from dislike, but from the unnerving realization that he treated her with more dignity than most people her age ever had. Later that week, gossip reached her through letters sent by acquaintances who pretended concern while reveling in scandal. Rumors claimed she had entrapped the Duke, that the wedding had been arranged out of desperation on her part, that she wanted the fortune and nothing of the man. One note cruelly predicted she would return home abandoned by summer. Eleanor felt the familiar sting of ridicule tightening her chest. She wished she could ignore it, but every whispered accusation seemed to resurrect the shame of that night at the ball. She wondered if the Duke had heard the rumors, and whether they fed any private doubts he might harbor about her character. Her answer arrived unexpectedly. During a small gathering hosted by a neighboring estate, a baroness, emboldened by wine and self-satisfaction, remarked within the Duke's earshot that young wives were often more decorative than respectable. Her eyes drifted to Eleanor with unmistakable implication. Eleanor's breath caught. She steeled herself for silence, for polite dismissal, for the expected indifference of powerful men who refuse to soil their prestige with domestic defense. But the Duke set his glass down with a sound that cut through the parlor. "Lady Eleanor is neither decoration nor rumor," he said, voice controlled but edged with warning. "She is my wife, and I will not tolerate careless tongues diminishing her." The room fell into stunned quiet. Eleanor felt heat rise in her throat, not embarrassment, but something warmer, gentler. Gratitude. Astonishment. The first flicker of safety she had felt in years. On the carriage ride home, she dared a quiet acknowledgement. "You did not need to defend me so publicly." "Of course, I did," he said simply. "Respect is not optional in my household." His tone held no boast, no desire for her praise, only conviction. She found herself studying him more closely, trying to understand the man beneath the reputation. His profile suggested sternness, but his manner revealed discipline, not cruelty. She sensed the remnants of old hurt within him, pain that had carved him into a man cautious with affection, yet deliberate in kindness. That night, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, she wandered into the manor's greenhouse. The air was cool, the quiet profound. She allowed herself a single tear, then another, until her composure dissolved entirely. The Duke found her there, though she had not heard him approach. He did not speak immediately. He merely held out his handkerchief, the gesture gentle enough to break her heart. "My lady," he said softly, "no tear of yours shall be dismissed so lightly again." Eleanor looked up, startled by the tenderness in his voice. And for the first time since her wedding, she wondered, not with fear, but with trembling hope, whether this union might become something more than survival. Calamity arrived not with thunder but with the shattering of a single porcelain cup, its fragments scattering across the corridor like a small domestic catastrophe that somehow mirrored the turmoil in Eleanor's heart. A servant gasped, apologizing profusely, yet Eleanor barely heard her. Her thoughts had been circling the same unspoken truth for days. The Duke's kindness frightened her almost as much as the marriage itself. The gift of the journal, the defense at the Baroness's gathering, the handkerchief offered in the greenhouse, each gesture chipped away at the cold distance she had expected. And though he had shown nothing but measured respect, she felt an ache she did not know how to name, a yearning born from being seen at last. She wondered whether she deserved such gentleness or whether it was only pity in disguise. These doubts accompanied her as steadily as her own shadow. Yet the evening that would shift the course of their bond began with nothing more dramatic than a restless mind. Unable to sleep, Eleanor left her chamber and wandered through the quiet hallways, seeking a refuge from her own spiraling thoughts. She found herself at the threshold of the library, drawn by the faint glow of candlelight beneath the door. She hesitated, thinking a servant had forgotten to extinguish it, but when she pushed the door open, she saw the Duke seated at a long table, his posture taut with unspoken tension. Papers surrounded him in neat yet overwhelming piles, as though he had been wrestling with affairs of state for hours. He looked up, not startled but contemplative, as though he had expected that solitude would eventually attract another sleepless soul. "I did not mean to disturb you," Eleanor whispered. "If you prefer to be alone, I can return." "You are not disturbing me," he said, rising with quiet composure. "In truth, I am grateful for company. This room has begun to feel like a confessional without a priest." His attempt at humor was subtle, almost self-conscious. Eleanor had never seen him speak so lightly. She felt something ease inside her. She stepped farther into the room. "Is the work very burdensome?" "Burdensome enough," he replied. "But not beyond bearing." His eyes observed her with a softened intensity. "And you? What keeps you awake at this hour?" She considered her words carefully, not wanting to reveal too much. "Sometimes my thoughts do not permit rest. They wander places I would rather they not go." He nodded slowly, as though he understood far more than she had admitted. "Then perhaps we share an ailment." He gestured for her to sit. "If you wish, stay a while. Wakefulness feels less like a punishment when shared." Eleanor accepted, settling across from him. A long silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but tentative. The flicker of the candle gave an intimacy to the moment that conversation did not need to fill. She realized she was studying him, the firmness of his jaw, the faint weariness around his eyes, the gravity that clung to him like an old companion. She wondered what sorrow had shaped him so thoroughly. "You look troubled," the Duke said gently. "If you carry a burden, I would have you speak it. Silence can be a cruel companion." Eleanor hesitated, then allowed herself honesty. "I fear disappointing you," she said quietly. "I fear failing in ways I do not yet understand." He leaned back, absorbing her confession with unexpected solemnity. "Eleanor, marriage forged through necessity often demands courage of the one with the least power. You have shown that courage far more than you know." His voice lowered. "If there is anyone who must fear failure, it is I." She blinked, startled. "You? Yes. His gaze held hers. Because power does not shield a man from doubt. My responsibilities are vast, my past, complicated. I worry that I may become a burden to you, that my presence may impose shadows where you deserve light. The admission startled her more than any compliment. I do not see you as a burden, she said, almost before she could think. If anything, I fear I am the one who weighs upon your life. He gave a faint, rueful smile. Then we misunderstand each other equally. Perhaps that is a beginning, rather than a flaw. The words warmed her, emboldening her enough to ask the question she had carried silently since their wedding. Your Grace, forgive me if this is too forward. But does kindness come easily to you? Or is it an effort made for my sake? He considered her with a depth that made her stomach twist. Kindness is not my instinct, he admitted. Duty is. Discipline is. But kindness, he exhaled slowly. I practiced it with my late wife because she was ill and deserved gentleness. After she passed, I feared giving tenderness again. It felt like betrayal to offer what once belonged to her. His voice dropped, roughened by memory. Until I met you. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Why me? Because you arrived in my life not demanding affection, nor expecting devotion. You came quietly, uncertain of your own worth, and yet carrying a grace I had not seen in years. He paused, then added, You remind me that the heart is not meant to remain closed forever. Her throat tightened. She looked down, unable to meet the full weight of his sincerity. I am not graceful, she murmured. Most days, I feel as though I am stumbling through a world that wishes me gone. Then the world is mistaken, he said with soft conviction. You are far stronger than you believe. His certainty wrapped around her like a warmth she had not expected to need. The room felt smaller, safer, as though the rest of the manor had receded, leaving only the fragile thread of connection forming between them. Eleanor lifted her eyes, allowing vulnerability to rise without apology. Your Grace, she whispered, you are the first man who has ever spoken to me as though my thoughts matter. The Duke's expression softened. Eleanor, he said gently, your thoughts could move empires if you allowed them to. Her breath trembled. For the first time in months, she felt something inside her shift, not merely hope, but the faint stirring of trust. She had braced herself for a husband indifferent to her existence, yet here was a man confessing his uncertainties with a humility that made her own heart ache. She wondered if he realized how deeply his words affected her. He moved to stand, as though sensing the intensity of the moment. But instead of stepping away, he approached her with slow, deliberate restraint. He lifted his coat from the back of his chair and draped it around her shoulders with a gentleness that stole her breath. Rest, he murmured. The night is long enough without adding worry to it. She touched the edge of the coat, surprised by its warmth. Thank you, she whispered. He stepped back, giving her space. Yet something unspoken lingered between them, a promise, perhaps, or the fragile beginning of one. As he reached the doorway, she found herself whispering, Your Grace, are we destined to remain strangers bound only by duty? Her question hung trembling in the air. He turned, eyes shadowed with meaning. That depends entirely, he said softly, on whether you wish to know the man behind the title. And before she could respond, he disappeared into the corridor, leaving her heart racing with the realization that the door between them had opened, if only by an inch.
Before she could speak her choice, a messenger arrived breathless from London with sealed papers bearing the crest of the Crown's treasury. The Duke opened them with a grim stillness, reading swiftly before looking up at Eleanor with an expression she could not decipher. The inquiry into her father's forged signature had been advanced to the Privy Council, an escalation far more dangerous than either had expected. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her, the last illusion of safety dissolving. The Duke stepped toward her, voice low, telling her there was only one way left to protect them all now. The revelation struck like a bell tolling in a deserted cathedral. The Duke's most trusted steward had disappeared, taking with him ledgers essential to proving Eleanor's family's solvency. Panic gripped her chest, cold and sharp, as if she were suddenly unmoored in the vast estate that had begun to feel like a fragile sanctuary. Eleanor had endured whispered ridicule, public scrutiny, and the fear of failure, yet this theft felt like the universe daring her to falter entirely. She turned toward the Duke, eyes wide, voice catching. Alistair, what will we do? He stood silently for a long moment, jaw clenched, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. His composure, usually so steady, seemed to tremble at the edges, revealing a vulnerability Eleanor had never witnessed before. We do as we have done all along, he said finally, voice low but resolute. We face it together. Eleanor's heart tightened. Together. The word carried more weight than any promise made at their formal wedding. Until now, marriage had felt like an obligation, a duty weighed down by titles and debts. Yet in that moment, it became something far more profound, a choice, delicate and defiant, that both of them were willing to honor. The night stretched on, and the manor seemed to hum with tension. Eleanor followed the Duke through long corridors that smelled faintly of wax and old oak, each footstep echoing in the quiet, reminding her of the stakes they faced. For hours, they worked side by side, drafting letters to creditors, appealing to allies, and arranging for investigations to recover the missing accounts. Despite the urgency, she could not help but notice how methodical he was, how his presence was both commanding and protective. He consulted her opinions, valued her judgment, and treated her with a respect that left her simultaneously comforted and humbled. As the clock chimed past midnight, Eleanor paused, resting her hands on the edge of the great writing table. She realized how much she had come to rely on his steadiness, how deeply his presence had become intertwined with her own sense of security. "Alistair," she whispered, almost to herself, "I do not know how I ever survived before this marriage. Not merely the obligations, but the life I could not find alone." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed with emotion, yet gentle. "Nor I, Eleanor. Nor I." He hesitated, then added softly, "You have given me more than a companion. You have given me courage I had long thought lost." The admission left her breathless. Courage. Not a claim of affection, not a vow of love, but something far more intimate, a recognition of her influence over the heart of a man the world considered untouchable. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyelids, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let them betray her in front of him. Minutes passed, then hours, until finally a letter arrived from a trusted banker in London. The accounts had been recovered, the steward apprehended, the estate's finances verified. The immediate danger passed, leaving behind a fragile stillness that felt both surreal and exhilarating. Eleanor sank into a chair, hands trembling with relief and fatigue. She had endured the storm, the walls of the manor no longer seemed threatening but protective. Alistair moved to stand beside her, resting one gloved hand lightly over hers. "You see," he said softly, "the world may try to pull us under, yet here we remain. Together." She lifted her eyes to meet his. The words she had not dared speak before now tumbled forth, carried on the weight of months spent observing his gestures, his quiet attentions, the way he had consistently chosen her in spite of circumstance. "Alistair, I cannot say that I love you yet, not fully. But I know now that I trust you, and that I wish to face every trial by your side. You are no burden, and I am not afraid of you anymore." A faint smile curved his lips, one that softened the severity of his usual demeanor. "That is all I could ever ask, Eleanor. Trust, patience, and the willingness to walk beside me. Love," he continued, voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a reward, not a demand. And you have already given me more than I dared hope for." The gravity of his words settled between them, delicate and immense. For the first time, Eleanor understood the depth of what their marriage had become, not merely a safeguard against financial ruin, nor a shield against social gossip, but a living, breathing partnership of mutual respect and emerging affection. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile hope that the life she had once feared could now be one of genuine companionship. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, pale and tentative. Eleanor moved to the window, hands resting lightly on the sill, feeling the quiet hum of the estate around her. Birds began to stir in the gardens below, their song cautious yet persistent, echoing the quiet victories that had been won within the walls of Ravensshire Manor. Alistair joined her, standing behind her with a gentle patience that seemed to honor both her space and her newfound courage. He did not speak immediately, letting the silence stretch, filled only by the soft sounds of morning. Finally, he said, voice low but certain, "We are stronger than the world allows us to believe. And stronger still when we are together." Eleanor allowed herself a full exhale, a release of tension she had been carrying since the day she first walked into his estate. "Together," she echoed, savoring the word, the concept, the promise it implied. The moment felt suspended, fragile, yet real, a breath caught between past fear and future possibility. Eleanor realized that the trust they had built, forged in moments of uncertainty and quiet revelation, had created a foundation far more enduring than any title or fortune could provide. And within that realization, a subtle shift occurred. She was no longer merely a young bride fulfilling a duty. She was a partner, a confidant, a presence he had chosen deliberately and without compulsion. He reached forward, lightly brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The gesture was simple, yet Eleanor felt its significance keenly. It was a sign of care, yes, but also of recognition, of an intimacy built on months of shared trials, confidences, and small victories. She did not shy away. Instead, she allowed herself to lean slightly into the touch, an acknowledgement of their bond that required no words. As the sun continued to rise, painting the sky with muted golds and soft rose, Eleanor felt a sense of equilibrium settle over her. The storm of scandal, the fear of obligation, the haunting whispers of society, All of it seemed to recede into the past, leaving only the quiet certainty that she and Alistair had endured, and perhaps even thrived, because of the choices they had made together. Yet even as hope bloomed, a lingering uncertainty remained. The world outside the walls of Ravenshire Manor was vast and unyielding. The whispers of society could never be entirely silenced, and new challenges were certain to arise. Eleanor felt the pull of that truth even amidst the peace of the moment, a reminder that their journey was not complete. She turned slightly, glancing at the Duke, and for the first time, allowed herself to see him not as an obligation, not as a distant figure of authority,
but as a man who had faced the weight of the world and chosen to share it with her. His expression was calm, yet there was something in his eyes, a quiet intensity, that suggested he, too, understood the fragility of their newfound equilibrium. Eleanor smiled softly, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and tentative affection. She placed a hand lightly over his, and he allowed her to do so, neither retreating nor advancing, simply letting the contact exist as a testament to their shared journey. And as the morning light strengthened, illuminating the manor in gentle clarity, Eleanor realized that this moment, delicate, powerful, and deeply personal, was not the conclusion of their story, but a new beginning. A beginning shaped not by circumstance or obligation, but by choice, respect, and the quiet emergence of love. Yet even as she embraced the fragile certainty of what they had built, the distant echo of society's watchful eyes lingered, a reminder that peace, no matter how hard won, was never absolute. And Eleanor, standing beside the man who had become her anchor, understood that the trials of the world had not ended, they had merely changed form.